For years, China has dominated Africa's economic landscape, pouring billions into infrastructure, securing resources, and expanding its influence. But Africa's honeymoon with China has hit the wall of disillusionment, and this serves an opening for countries like India. This is Shubhangi Sharma for CNN News 18. Let's dive in. At the recent Forum on China-Africa Cooperation held in Beijing, 51 African leaders attended, and China pledged $51 billion in investments for the next 3 years. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the catch. Only $10 billion of that is new investment. The rest, cleverly packaged old promises. This signals a shift in China's engagement with Africa, one that's dampened the mood in African nations. There was also lesser media coverage this time, as a sense of disillusionment has set in Africa. So what's changed? Why is Africa, once so eager to embrace China's investments, now growing disillusioned? Well, for years, China financed massive infrastructure projects across Africa. In return, the African nations took on heavy loans, now totaling over $170 billion. Recently, Beijing waived interest-free loans for 33 countries. Sounds generous, but that's just 5% of the total debt. And now, China's approach is changing. Massive projects are being replaced with new strategies like training African military forces, opening political party schools, and promoting its authoritarian model. For African leaders, the relationship is starting to feel less like a partnership and more like a power play. And this comes at a time when the nations have hardly any option but to yield to China's demands. This is because of China's debt trap diplomacy. Several African nations are reeling under unsustainable debt owed to China, which puts pressure on their economies. And Beijing hasn't made it easy for them either. China is secretive about the amount of money it loans and on what terms, and this has deterred other major lenders from stepping in to assist. Adding to this is the revelation that borrowers have been compelled to place funds into concealed escrow accounts, giving China priority as the first creditor to be repaid. Now, this has brought nations like Kenya and Zambia close to default, and it's the general public that pays the price through inflation, salary cuts and delays, lower government spending, poorer services, and so on. This ultimately affects not just the economy but the sovereignty of these nations. So over time, Africa has begun to recognize the inherent imbalance in the relationship with China. As the world's second largest economy and second most populous country, China has always held the upper hand when dealing with Africa's smaller and less powerful economies. While China is the largest trading partner for an increasing number of African countries, the continent as a whole remains a minor player in Beijing's grand global strategy. In fact, Africa accounts for less than 5% of China's global trade, far overshadowed by the trade flows China enjoys with the United States, Europe, and even South Asia. Though trade between China and Africa continues to grow, its momentum has noticeably slowed down since the pandemic, and on top of that, Beijing is quietly pulling back on its financial commitments to the continent. This retreat, combined with growing frustrations over unfavorable terms, is prompting many African nations to reconsider their options and explore partnerships with countries offering better deals. Yet despite these shifts, China still holds the title of Africa's top trading partner. In 2023, two-way trade hit a record $282 billion, and China's foreign direct investment in Africa reached $4.2 billion, nearly double that of the United States. And it also still remains the continent's leading lender. So while the once glowing partnership hasn't completely dimmed, it's clear that the cracks are forming, leaving the future of this relationship quite uncertain. This growing disillusionment is creating opportunities for other nations. Countries like South Korea, Indonesia, and even Saudi Arabia are stepping in with their own Africa +1 summits. But one country stands out in the global south: India. India is currently spending $7.5 billion in 40 African countries. That amount is smaller than China's, but it comes with less risk and more good for Africa. You see, India's approach to Africa is different. It's not just about extracting resources or securing markets, it's about empowering Africa to grow alongside it. First, India focuses on capacity building. Initiatives like the Pan-African E-Network connect African countries with Indian expertise in education and healthcare. This came at a cost of over $125 million, but it isn't about money. It's about skills and empowerment. And don't forget, during its G20 presidency, India called for the inclusion of the African Union, ensuring that it gets a seat at the high table. It was a remarkable show of solidarity, one that was deeply appreciated by African leaders. Moreover, India is driving renewable energy through the International Solar Alliance. By helping African nations harness solar power, India is addressing energy needs sustainably. Further, India's trade policies boost local economies. Programs like duty-free tariff preference allow African exports to enter India without barriers, unlike China's approach of flooding African markets with cheap goods. India and Africa share a common fight against colonialism and have strong diaspora connections too. Around 3% of Africa's total population is of Indian origin. That's a significant living bridge that has boosted India-Africa ties for decades. Moreover, thousands of Indian peacekeeping troops have and continue to serve in Africa, cultivating goodwill in some of the most strife-torn parts of the continent. So with the current rise of disillusionment towards China and Africa, there is a growing opportunity for India to step up its game in this continent.